Guys, Brian here, Starlite Pulp, and this is Starlite Pulpcast. Today's guest is Mr. Phillip Thompson, who has a new book out called Not Dead Enough. It features Colt Harper, and this is the third correct Colt Harper novel. Is that right?
Uh, yeah, third from this particular publisher. Yes,
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. So, Phillip, how you doing today, man?
doing good, doing good. Thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely. So in Colt Harper, we have a small town sheriff. Yeah. In the South. And so tell us a little bit about Not Dead Enough and what we need to know about it.
Okay, well, you gave the best introduction right there. Colt is a small town sheriff in a rural town in Mississippi, and the book itself is really a story about combat veterans and the bond that combat veterans share. Guys who serve in the military, especially those who have been in combat, they form these very, very intense bonds. And sometimes those bonds are formed for life, but most times, you have this specific period in time where you're together. You're serving your time in the service, and then when it's done, you go your separate ways. And then, 25 years later, you might meet up again under completely different circumstances, and that's sort of the setup for this one. You have Colt, who is doing his job, being sheriff with his best friend, who is also his deputy, also served with him in the Marine Corps. And then suddenly, a character from California shows up, who a guy named Robert Wilson, who goes by the name or used to go by the name Flip Wilson, and Flip is now in a situation that's very dangerous. He's gotten involved with some drug dealing. He's dealing with his own addictions, and he comes to the one man that he thinks that can help him, which is Colt Harper. And Colt's the lawman. He has a sworn duty to uphold the law, so they're kind of coming at this issue with completely different perspectives, and therein lies the conflict.
Excellent. Okay. And I know, correct me if I'm wrong here, but this made the Amazon bestseller list there for a bit, yeah?
It did. It did very shortly after it came out, which was surprising and very pleasing.
I can only imagine, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. And so this is the third Colt Harper novel, like you mentioned, a couple different publishers, but is this a character that you feel you can move forward with, or will continue to write as you progress, or is it something you feel like foundationally you can do a series with?
Good question. Whenever I finish writing one of these, I always think, well, I think I've expended all the resources on that particular character, but I have to say, Colt and a couple of the other supporting characters in that universe, they've been with me now for going on 15 years,
Sure.
in one form or another. So it's really kind of hard to walk away from them. I would like to think that, yeah, Colt is a guy that as long as there's miscreants out there challenging his sense of justice and righteousness, then he's always going to have a reaction to it. So I think there could be some pretty fertile ground ahead. I haven't really made that complete decision yet, though.
Sure. And by the way, I asked this. I didn't even have this planned. I'm just curious because you mentioned 15 years, and this is the third novel. When you start a novel from planning stage all the way until its completion, I don't mean publishing date, that's a different thing, but the
Yeah.
completion of the manuscript, how long are we talking with a novel of yours, generally speaking?
Now, completion before it gets shipped off to an editor and
Yeah.
agent and all that. Usually about, well, right now about a year and a half.
Okay.
Only because I'm like a lot of writers these days. It's not what I do all the time. I have a job, and then I have to write sort of in my spare time. Even though I like to consider I'm a writer who has a daytime job to support my writing habit. So it's usually about a year and a half. But I started thinking about these characters a long time ago, and it took a while to get them sorted out in my head what I want to do, especially this book. because this novel originated in a short story that I wrote, a dozen years ago, and the short story was about Flip Wilson and another Marine. The Colt wasn't even in that first short story, and
Love that.
when I wrote it
Yeah.
and I got it published, Veterans Writing Project is the one that published it, which is a great nonprofit that supports veterans and helping them express themselves with writing and acting, directing, comedy, what have you.
Very cool.
But I had this story about this. It was kind of a madcap kind of story about these two bonehead Marines that get into a lot of trouble, tragically so. And
Uh-huh.
when the story was published and settled a little bit, I was like, I wonder whatever happened to Flip Wilson. What happens to a guy like that?
Right.
And it kind of just, it just kind of kept bugging me over time. And after I wrote Outside the Law, which was the first cult novel that Brash Books published, I wanted to write this one, but it just wasn't quite ready to do it yet, and there wasn't enough formation in the story. So
Sure.
I just kept thinking about it, until till the time was right, which was now.
Sure. Yeah, it's funny. Something else you mentioned right there that just made me kind of think of this is that when people are, because I get this question sometimes, when people are not writers, they are readers and movie watchers, things like that. They will ask things like, these characters that you write about, they're curious as to how they exist in the world when you're not writing about them, right? And and
Yeah, good.
and and you just mentioned that with Flip Wilson. Like, there are characters that I have written about in the past that I'll kind of think, gosh, I wonder what so and so is doing these days, and yet even though it's an entirely fictional character that you created, that so really the only person that knows what Flip is doing is you, but you're
Right.
sitting there going, you know, I wonder what's befallen him.
I'm not saying we hear voices in our head or talk to imaginary people, but we kind of do
And
because um, I don't know. It is strange. I do say things like, "Well, I wonder what that person's up to," as if
absolutely.
they are a real person. And I think it helps me a lot if they are existing, if only in my mind, because when I sit down to write, then I know that character's got something to say and wants to tell me. And sometimes the voice gets so loud I have to stop what I'm doing and write it. It's like, okay, just listen to her, write it down. And I
Sure.
say her because one of my supporting characters is Deputy Molly McDonough.
Mhm.
And she is the loudest one of all. For whatever reason that is, I don't get to pick them. I just get to tell the stories. But yeah, they are kind of real people. They do exist in the universe, and it's
No,
the
it's
universe that I choose
true.
to
Yeah.
go into.
Yeah. Even
Yeah,
though they're entirely fictional, they still very much exist for
yeah,
you,
they're
yeah.
very real to me.
Yeah, yeah, it's funny because what I find myself thinking sometimes, this is, off in crazy land, but I find myself thinking, I write Western some, and sometimes I'll find myself thinking about the Western characters and what might be happening with them, which of course,
Yeah.
is crazy because we're talking about 100 and 30, 40 years ago anyways, and then they're a fictional character. But I have this character Rye Lonehand who I've written a couple stories about. He also appears briefly in the novella I'm working on right now too, and he's half Pawnee and half Irish, and I find myself thinking what a difficult life that would be at that
Right,
time, you know what I mean, and how
right,
to
right,
how
right.
to how to navigate that, so it's yeah, it's curious, the impact that these make believe folks have on our heads.
Yeah, that is true. Um, especially this. I didn't sit down to write that short story with any intention at all of going any further with it.
Yeah.
Um, and it sort of the story came to me, and I really wanted to write it, not for any any, metaphysical reason or anything like that. I just wanted to write this particular story. And when I put it down, I thought, okay, well,
Yep.
that's great. That's a good story. And I was very fortunate to have it published. So I thought that was the end of it. And then, a month later, I'm staring at the TV, not watching what I was watching on TV, but just staring at it because
Uh-huh.
I kept thinking about, this guy named Flip Wilson,
Hmm.
and a guy and his best friend, a guy named, of all things, Moonpie Jones, and I
Hmm.
just couldn't stop thinking about him. And
Yeah.
so it was like, oh, I wonder what he's doing out in California right now. Probably up to
Right.
no good, and it just sticks with you over time.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I love it. All right, so let's talk since we're talking characters here, let's talk protagonists because you've got Colt Harper here, right? The
Right.
sheriff. And I have a couple characters I write. I have Sonny Haynes that does the crime stuff, and then I've got Rye that is in some of the westerns. And and I want to talk about protagonists because we all grow up with books, we all grow up with series, anybody who anybody in our line of work in any way, shape, or form has read, you know, Philip Marlowe and Sam Spade. I mean that
Right.
you can't not. And so
Right.
uh so speaking of Colt Harper, how did the character come about, and then what kind of influences came into it, do you think?
A lot of influences. I think it probably came about. I'm a big, big fan of John D. McDonald.
Hmm.
And I mean, I sort of, go to the church of McDonald when I have to, get into learning about writing. And the Travis McGee novels were
Yeah.
one of the very first things when I was in my 20s. I read a few of those. And that was the very first time I remember having the idea that, I want to write a series of books about not a cop,
Hmm.
not a detective, just this one particular guy. And Travis McGee was sort of the thinking man's PI in a lot of ways, I thought. And that was one ingredient to coming up with a character of my own. And there were, I grew up in the 70s. Went to a lot of movies, a lot of R-rated movies that I shouldn't have too soon. But there were a couple of main themes that came through, and one was Dirty Harry.
Sure.
Half 80% of what Harry Callahan does is illegal, or unethical, but he
Absolutely.
gets the job done. You know, so he would, Dirty Harry's definitely another one. I grew up in the Deep South. The legend of Buford Pusser and of the Walk and Tall, the original Walk and Tall
Mhm. Right.
movies
Right.
and stories that had a huge influence on me as a kid. He
Okay.
was the epitome of walk, carry a big stick, walk softly and
Yep.
carry a big stick. And then, reading Elmore Leonard, and you read some of his characters, Raylan Givens being one of them.
Hmm.
Um, and then, other pop culture kind of things like, even it's the CBS show that, Magnum PI to me, Magnum PI is the embodiment of Travis McGee.
Hmm.
So, you have all these different types of people that I wanted to kind of pour into this character, mainly because I didn't want it to be, and I hope I haven't done this, I didn't want it to be a cardboard cutout of, just this, he's this one-dimensional person. I wanted a guy who lived in a black and white world and thinks he's after, justice and the law. Um, but he's plagued by conscience sometimes with some of his actions. And I always saw that in Travis McGee, or some of the other characters. So I wanted to kind of give him a little bit of depth. And if I couldn't give him the depth that I wanted, at least he would be able to see that depth in the people around him sometimes. So you have people like John
Sure.
Carver as his chief deputy.
Sure. And that's one of the things too is it's about the protagonist. It's always about the protagonist, but the side characters often are what make novels
Right.
because like for example, I mentioned earlier with you, I have read probably every James Lee Burke book I can imagine. I've read every Dave Robichaux. I know that. And
Yeah.
Dave Robichaux pisses me off. He
Yeah, I know what you mean.
God, he's so self-righteous, and
Yeah.
it gets so old. But Cleet is phenomenal as a sidekick,
Yeah.
and so there are those characters that end up carrying books for you sometimes. And it's not like I hate Dave. I like Dave. He just annoys me, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and of course, you know, they're taken without question. I've never heard this directly, but number of references and the amount of reading I've done on it, they're taken from very much from the wider Doc Holliday archetype,
Oh,
right?
okay.
Which is why it's kind of the boring lawman who does everything generally speaking by the book. Sometimes he goes over the line with regards to violence. And Doc Holliday, Cleet, is the sidekick who doesn't follow any of the rules and doesn't
Right.
care about the rules, right? And that dynamic tends to work really well. It works well for them. Obviously, you know, Wyatt and Doc as well. But those side characters sometimes are what make books, just like a lot of times in movies, the villains make the movie, right? Like in a lot of Bond
Yes.
films, more people remember the you know the villain than they do a lot of the stuff Bond does. Uh
Right.
so yeah, it's interesting how that works. But with like for me, Marlowe, of course, Marlowe was my first, I think, probably literary love. Um, my character Sonny Haynes, I don't think is like him at all. He's far, far, far more flawed and dinged up than Marlowe ever was. But you know, Chandler had that thing about how, you know, he must be a common man, but you know, and then this whole list of archetypes that, you know, that the protagonist has to follow. And it's
Right.
interesting. So you mentioned Travis McGee, and then, you know, Magnum PI, and how it all kind of moves forward over time. Is Colt somebody who you enjoy writing when you're in the process?
I do. I find it to be aggravating sometimes.
Mhm.
Colt is pretty, he's pretty black and white and can
Right.
be pretty pig-headed. So, and depending on who you ask, I'm not like that at all. But my world's a little bit grayer, and so sometimes it's kind of hard to remember. No, 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 that's me talking. That's not Colt talking.
Right.
And I've got a good feel for what he thinks he wants to do, and having John and now even Molly as a counterbalance. To they say the things that he's unable to because he's
Right.
buttoned up or he's stubborn or by God, I'm gonna do it this way, and you either come along or walk away.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I do enjoy writing them only because well, not only, but one of the reasons why is I love putting them in a situation and saying, okay, now what are you going to do?
Hmm.
You think you're this righteous lawman, and that everything you do is done for the perfect reason, but isn't.
Right.
And here you go, fix this one.
Right.
And watching him try to, you know, sniff his way through some of these situations is a lot of fun to write.
Yeah. And you know, those you put characters who seem incorruptible, you put in morally reprehensible situations and see what
Yeah.
they do, right? I mean, yeah.
Well, especially, and I do think in this one, and because I think it's because Flip Wilson is able to be in this story. I do think this is the story where you really see, Colt get pushed to the edge of what he wants to do and what he thinks he can do.
Mhm.
Um, you know, he this guy, Flip and Colt have not seen each other for years and years and years.
Right.
The occasional phone call. Flip calls Colt when he's high or when he's, down on his luck.
Right.
And Colt just sort of says, well, this guy's a lost cause. John's always there, sort of in the background, but sort of in the middle. John knows both of them. He served with them.
Right.
Flip shows up, being chased by LA drug dealing gang members and himself in the throes of an addiction. He stole a whole bunch of money, and he comes all the way to Mississippi and dumps all this at Colt's feet and says, "You got to help me." Colt's like, "Well, screw you. Everything you're doing is criminal. I'm a man of the law. I can't help you. You belong, and you've done some criminal things that require me to arrest you." I'm trying not to, give any spoilers away.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for Colt, this is a really, really simple thing. You broke the law. You confessed to breaking the law. I'm putting your sorry ass in jail, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Right.
And John is the counterbalance there that says, "Come on, Colt, this guy's a buddy of ours. We know him. He's
Right.
one of us.
Right.
What do we do now?" And then, that's where that constant conflict of Colt being in conflict with himself,
Sure.
in his own ideas of what he's supposed to do as a man of the law, but also what's he supposed to do as a friend, as a Marine,
Sure.
as a combat veteran who shares a bond with this other combat veteran, for better or for worse.
Yeah.
And I think without having John in there, without having Molly in there, it doesn't work as well.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that, like you just mentioned, putting people in circumstances that make them question who they are,
Mm-hmm.
it just works so well. They're two of the major tropes in crime writing are you put the incorruptible into morally questionable circumstances and see how they react, or you put the morally questionable character into a position where he or she needs to do the right thing.
Yes.
You see if they can do it. And
yes.
and the reason they're tropes is because they work well. I mean, those are things that people like to see because people relate to that stuff. I mean,
yes.
we all have our faults. We all recognize what they are sometimes,
And we all want to say, what would I do in that situation?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah. Yeah, good. So I want to touch on we talked about this before, and as I was reading Not Dead Enough, I noticed that you do one of the things that is listed on Elmore Leonard's 10 rules for writing. And that is that first off, I want to read a couple of them, right? The first one is never open a book with weather, which I think is interesting because it seems to me like James Lee Burke does that a lot in Louisiana.
And
right?
now I'm sitting there thinking, oh my God, have I done that?
Yeah, right. I mean, and quite frankly, I mean, I think an opening scene of, a guy or gal driving in a truck or a car towards a storm scene, and you're describing this thunderhead. I think that's a great opening. So I don't I don't know, but anyways, there's that. There's avoid prologues, which I'm also guilty of, unfortunately. But the third one is never use a verb other than said to carry dialogue.
Okay.
And that's one that I noticed that you follow in this. And I'm currently reading a Western by Robert B. Parker right now. He does that. And then this is obviously on Elmore Leonard's, guidelines or rules. So talk to me about that. Why do you do that, and what's the decision behind it?
Okay. I think it's my journalism training.
Okay.
As a reporter, when you're writing a news story or any story for the newspaper, you're not gonna use a lot of different types of ways of attribution. In a news story, it's the mayor said, the fire chief said. There's a lot of this said. It's not a lot. That's all you do, and that becomes an ingrained habit. There's a couple of journalism habits that I have a very hard time breaking. Drives my editor absolutely nuts. But okay, it happens. I think the other thing is, and we've all read, the purple prose of some novels. I'm so happy to be here. The mayor gushed,
Right.
or things like that. And but I had a creative writing instructor years ago. He's no longer with us, unfortunately. A guy named Robert Bausch, who's was a fantastic writer himself.
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of drilled us on that as well. As he taught us a lot about dialogue. And dialogue's very, very tricky. And he said, you don't need to say anything else other than said, because if you're writing the dialogue correctly, the reader's going to understand that he's doing it happily, or he's doing it angrily, or he's, whichever. And, I kind of took that on board. And I know that a couple of times, depending on who the editor has been, um, the editor, the editors that I've worked with have also preferred it. And it's been years since I've done anything else other than you said. But basically, it's my journalism training.
Okay. Okay. Because that's one of those things that I don't adhere to at all.
Right.
So I always find it interesting because if there's a question mark, I'll generally say he or she asked
Hmm.
because there's a question mark there. And if somebody answers the question, I might say so and so answered. I might also say something like, he turned to spit, then added colon, and then and there's no said there either. And then there are there's so many ways to go about it because I mean, obviously, I'm sure you've read Cormac McCarthy quite a
Yeah.
bit. He doesn't even use quotes, and half the time you don't even know who's talking. Like,
Right.
yeah, yeah, and so it's kind of on you to figure it out. Um, so I just think it's an interesting one because when you put it like Elmore Leonard does, who knows far more about writing than I ever will, so it's not a knock. It's just interesting to me because it's such a hard and fast like rule, like
Yeah.
don't use
I've
anything
never
that
treated it as a rule. I just treat it more as a practice, I guess. I didn't put it this way. I didn't read, Elmore's rules and say, oh, I got to do this one.
right, right, right.
Um, it just sort of evolved over time, starting with, I worked for a few years in a newsroom, and you're writing, news stories all the time, and it's always said, and then that was reinforced by a writing instructor. Now there are other techniques, like you said, and I do that a lot. Um, I don't always I don't always attribute a quote,
Mhm,
especially if the character's doing something, you
mhm.
know. I think if a lot of times, and it's just to make sure the reader isn't confused.
Yeah.
I have I
Oh,
have
totally. Yeah.
I have a bad habit of using pronouns sometimes that can be confusing. But if he rolled the window down and threw the cigarette butt out, period, and then you can have a quote there, some dialogue. It's pretty clear who's saying that, and
Right.
you don't have to include the he said, because it does get a little, and I hear it in my head sometimes
Hmm.
how redundant it gets. And it's like boy, we did a great exercise, overusing names in dialogue.
Hmm.
How are you, Bob? I'm good, Ted. That's good, Bob.
Right.
And it's like, holy cow, all this
Right.
ping pong and stuff is driving me nuts. And
Right.
sometimes the seds can do that too. So I try to pay attention to it, but that's the only one I use.
And what's interesting though is that people don't talk like that. Like
No,
I haven't referred to you as Philip once, except
no.
when I introduced you. Like, that's interesting, Philip. Like
And
I don't
it
really,
annoys me when people do that.
right. So yeah, it seems, like you said, dialogue can be tricky. And, it, you know, as much as I'm getting on this about the said thing, and I am,
Yeah.
we all acknowledge that Elmore was one of the better writers of dialogue that we've ever read.
I
So,
did read a lot of Elmore to learn it. I mean,
yeah, yeah.
reading John McDonald and Elmore Leonard, and I mean, not just reading it, but studying it is how I learned how to write dialogue.
Hmm. I'll oftentimes not attribute the quote to anybody at all, especially when there's just two people having a
Yeah.
conversation. I don't see any reason to. If they're
No,
just
there's no
going
need.
back and forth with quote, there's no, just every
Yeah.
fourth or fifth one you can throw in, that he added or she said or whatever. But they're, um, but yeah, I do a lot of things like that, like added, he added,
Hmm.
not said, and the next rule I do want to point out is never use an adverb to modify the verb said, like he admonished gravely. And that's kind of like when you said, the mayor gushed, right? Which is,
Right. Two
yeah,
exclamation points. He yelled loudly. Yeah, that's just okay.
yeah,
Don't insult your reader.
yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of writers, young writers especially, that once you do it enough, you all the nuances come into play. But one of them is never use the word suddenly or all hell broke loose, which is I think good advice, but that's only if you're writing prose. If you're
Uh-huh.
writing if you're writing dialogue, you can use that all the time. If you have a character that says all hell broke loose, he might say it 5 times in a book. And
Yeah.
we all know well, most of the people we know are not particularly articulate, right? With what they're saying. So it's like, you're going to have characters that say things that don't always make sense. You
And
know,
there's a lot of cliches involved. And
without question, without
see,
question.
I guess that's probably, if you ask my editor, this is probably the biggest crime that I commit
Mhm.
is using cliches. I think any writer is susceptible to them. It's like, well, people talk like that. People say
Yeah,
all
they
hell
do.
broke loose. You
They do.
know, you know, and he will tear me to pieces over, cliches throughout the manuscript, both in dialogue and in the narrative. And I have to be aware of that. I get that. It's like,
Yeah.
so, okay, you don't like me saying that. I'm just going to put it in quotes.
Yeah.
If I, the narrator, can't say he's crazy as a June bug, then I'm going to have a character say that guy's crazy as a June bug, and then you can't say anything about it.
Right. Yeah, and that's the thing is use it in dialogue, it's fine. Whereas if I say, or if we're writing and you say in the next moment all hell broke loose, well, that's not good.
Yeah, it's lazy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you want to avoid that. He also has one that is use regional dialect or patois sparingly, which is interesting because I kind of come from the James Elroy school of I love just American idioms. I just love
Uh-huh.
the different dialects that we have because what the Northeast uses versus what you guys use in the South versus what we use on the West versus what the Midwest considers normal are all totally different.
Oh yeah,
And they're totally different based on the time. Like
right.
what an Old West character, sorry, I shouldn't say that. A 19th century character in New England is completely different from what an Old West character in Arizona would say. And so
Oh, absolutely.
yeah, and
Um,
so it's interesting, but at the same time, you don't want to overdo it in the way that you write it, right? So you need to be
yes,
careful with it.
I you know I do believe that if you're gonna have a sense of place in your writing, then you need to also have a sense of language in it too,
Mhm.
because we are a nation of regions, each with its own culture and dialect. So I tend to use a deep South dialect and tone in it, but what I don't try to do, I did at first, but I've stopped doing it. I don't try to phonetically sound the dialect or the accent out. Faulkner used to do that, and Flannery O'Connor, who is, almost like a Bible to me.
Sure.
And she's very, very good at setting the place. But, a lot of times she would write almost phonetically.
Mhm.
Um, in the South, rather than say I'm going to, it comes out as I'm gonna go to the store. Well, that's AHMOAN. I'm on,
I'm gonna
and
go.
she would write it like that. But
Mhm.
a lot of times, it's all it does is serve to confuse the reader. And if you're trying to follow the accent along as you go, then you're going to get lost you're going to lose the story. So I write it in straight English, but yeah, there's going to be some things that I'll use that you're not going to hear, in other places of the country.
Yeah, you like even in the Old West novella I'm writing right now, it's like if somebody says, if one of the characters said, "Well, I can't see it," it's do you write can't and say that it is pronounced can't, or do you just write I can't see it.
Right.
CAINT, right? And so I normally choose to just write it the way it sounds, is because that seems
Okay.
truer to me than explaining it, right? I'd rather,
Yeah.
it's like that show don't tell, right? Which is I'd rather just show it, put it out there, and if you get it, you get it, rather than have to explain it with the way it
Yeah.
sounds. But I'm not saying that's right. I'm just saying that's how I deal with it. I don't know.
Yeah. I've done it. I've done that sparingly, I guess, to use your word, with a minor, excuse me, with a minor character that I've made so different and
Hmm.
weird
Hmm.
that in that one instance, I think it's okay to, spell out the words exactly the way that
Yeah,
particular character says them. If the word sheriff comes out sheriff, then you write it SHURF
absolutely.
and
Yeah,
let it go. But I don't think I would do it for the entire, manuscript. I would, generally speaking, I write it as it's supposed to be written and allow the reader to make up his own mind about what the accent sounds like.
sure. Okay. Um, and then the one thing I skipped a few, obviously, but then it says my most important rule is one that sums up all 10. And then it says if it sounds like writing, I rewrite it.
That's a
And
great rule, isn't it?
it's a great that's a great rule in my mind. That's a great rule when it comes to dialogue.
Hmm.
It's not a great rule if you're describing like the I know I keep going back to it, I apologize, but if you're reading the Dave Robichaux books and he's describing New Iberia, that sounds like writing. Sorry,
Yeah.
it's beautiful. It's quote unquote flowery language, which I'm not a fan of that term, it's but it sounds like writing. It and not many people can do that. So I
Right.
appreciate. Whereas with dialogue, yeah, I agree. If it sounds like you're writing dialogue, then that's a problem, right?
That is a problem.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, when you read James Dickey, for example,
Yeah.
if you forget about the movie Deliverance and you read the novel,
Hmm.
that writing, I mean, it almost approaches poetry. The
Hmm.
way he writes that book
Right.
is so beautifully lyrically done,
Right.
and you're reading writing,
Yeah.
but you're also reading this just beautiful description of
Yeah.
whatever is happening at the time. And the first time I read it, I was just so blown away that as soon as I finished it, I started reading it again.
Hmm.
Because I just wanted to absorb it as much as possible. So yeah, I mean, I think sometimes you have to, as a writer, whether you're the narrator of the piece or not, but as the writer, sometimes you have to come from some place of authority and put out, that page, that paragraph, that chapter of what you're trying to get across. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but
Right.
when you're writing dialogue, which is, as we all know, is the hardest damn thing to do, it's got to sound like a conversation. And
Yeah. No, without question.
Leonard is so damn good at that. Just being able to,
Oh
you
yeah.
can hear those characters talking,
Hmm.
and you can practically see them talking to each other. It's that's when you're succeeding.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that's one of the reasons I struggle with that last rule because I love it. If it sounds like writing, I rewrite it. But for me, it only applies to dialogue because I started out as a poet and
Yeah.
the whole idea of poetry, it's not supposed to sound normal. I mean,
No, you're painting pictures.
yeah, exactly.
You're
You're trying to do something with words that other people can't do. So
right.
it makes no, so of course it's going to sound like writing. Like so when you go through a list like this, kudos to Elmore, not no knock, but you have to see what makes sense for yourself. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because and make sense of it. Because otherwise you get caught up in it, and then according to this list, I would write the most spare crime story imaginable, and I don't think it would be very good. Because
Yeah, they're guidelines, not hard and fast rules, I would say. And it's, Elmore Leonard is such a high level that he
oh
can
yeah,
put down 10 rules and say that
yeah,
these are what you're supposed to do. Rest of us will spend most of our life trying to complete one of them.
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
and it's good to keep them in mind, but boy, um, I don't think I'll ever get to a point to where at some point it's going to feel, oh God, boy, do I sound like a writer here. But sometimes I
Yeah.
feel like you have
Yeah.
to do that to get your point across.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, good. All right, so I want to talk to you about your journalism influence, but you kind of touched on that a little bit with the the said, right? He said, she
Right.
said kind of remarks. How do you think in any other ways, how do you think that your journalism background, because you started that, correct me if I'm wrong, right out of the Marine Corps, right?
I did, yeah. I've gotten a journalism degree in college. When I graduated from Ole Miss,
Ole Miss.
um, and of course, I went to the Marine Corps, and having a journalism degree would the Marine Corps said, well, that'll make him a perfect artillery officer. So that's what I did for a while. But yeah, afterwards, I went back to my hometown to get a job and started working for the newspaper there. Very first story I was put on was a capital murder case with
Hmm.
3 defendants. Okay, so you're sitting in
Interesting.
the courtroom 3 different times, same crime, different defendants, different arguments each time. And you're seeing the same murder from 3 different perspectives, at least three
Sure.
different perspectives.
Sure.
So the journalism influence um, comes to me in the form of trying not to get too flowery with the language. It's here's the
Yeah.
facts,
Yeah.
here's what happened, and you just sort of lay it out like that. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily a good thing. I had been, accused or critiqued as being as sounding too journalistic sometimes in my writing, and that's probably true. Um, but that's part of the influence there. The other is just an innate curiosity.
Hmm.
Oh, I'm going to cover a murder case. Well, what's that all about? And the more, I mean, I'm a terrible victim of going down rabbit holes.
Right.
If you ask me if I want to know the answer to one thing, when I get halfway there, well, that's interesting. Oh, well, that's interesting,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I'll just keep digging, keep digging, keep
Yep.
digging, and looking for other sources. How do I corroborate this? So all of that plays into trying to sit down and write a novel, whether it's a crime novel or not. You're going to do a lot of research. You're going to ask that weird question and well, this is seems like the answer to this, but is it? And then you want to go and verify it. So trying to get to the bottom of things,
Sure.
and then structuring it in a way that's a story. Don't bury the lead. Start with the most important thing. All that plays into trying to
Yeah.
write a bigger, more expansive story.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting. We're like we're total opposites in that sense because you've been accused of being too journalistic, and I get accused of being too poetic or flowery with my language. That and they're like, well, noir writers don't write like that, and it's like,
Right. And well, you have an English background, right? So
exactly, yeah. So but. Yeah, that and poetry. But okay, so what how did you make the transition at some point? Because you were a journalist before you were a fiction writer, correct?
yeah.
Okay. So how did you make the transition from journalism to crime writing?
Um, I always wanted to be a writer in some form or fashion, and even before I left the Marine Corps, I thought I want to be, and this is going to make me sound really stupid, but that's okay. I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to write novels, but I didn't exactly know how to get there.
Who
I
does?
thought it was a matter of, hey, I'm going to write this novel. It's going to be, 85,000 words, and somebody in New York is going to buy it, and then, I'm going to run John Grisham out of town, and then I'll be
And that's
set.
it.
Well, it doesn't work. It doesn't work that way. So I got a job, as a journalist because I had the degree, and that's something that I'm really passionate about. I got a job as a journalist, and while I was writing, other things in my off time. And for years, I really didn't know. I didn't know what my voice was. I wanted to write fiction. I
Yeah.
wanted to write interesting, kind of actiony stuff. And I made a few attempts at writing that, and I struggled with finding a voice,
Hmm.
to be honest. And then, one day after I'd moved to Virginia and I was no longer working for a newspaper, I was, doing another job. I read a Larry Brown novel. And when I read Larry Brown,
Uh-huh.
that fundamentally changed everything about the way I was approaching my fiction writing.
Okay.
He was a North Mississippi writer. He was, as far as I know, he was self-taught, and
So,
he wrote like a strange combination of James Dickey and William Faulkner and Flannery all mixed together. And he wrote about these people that call them what you want, rural people,
mhm,
rednecks, and he wrote about them in a way that was so immediately relatable to me.
mhm.
I think the first one I read was probably Dirty Work. And, as soon as I read it, I was like, oh my God, he's writing about my people.
Right.
And he's writing about them in a way that I can relate to and that doesn't strip them of their dignity and turn them into tropes or stereotypes.
Mhm.
It'd be really, really easy to write about these people and make them the Dukes of Hazzard. It's already been done. But Larry Brown had this just incredible ability to write about the human condition of these very rural people. They don't have a very big world view. A lot of them don't have a lot going on, and there's this flavor of crime fiction to it.
Mhm.
But it's Larry wrote a lot more, I would say, literary type novels than he did straight up
Yeah.
crime novels.
Yeah, I would say that. Yeah.
But that flipped the switch for me. And I said, that's the place I want to be in. That's the people I want to write about, and that's how I want to write about them. But I want to do it in a, there's got to be some bad people and some law and order and some violence. So that was the real transition for me.
Interesting. Interesting. I love hearing writer stories. I just do. I love hearing, uh, for me, I mean, I grew up with, you know, a lot of mysteries, detective stuff, and there was Marlowe, and then I got into, a whole bunch of Thompson and stuff. Read Stephen King from the time. I mean, I swear, I mean, after Encyclopedia Brown, I think like Stephen King was what I read. Like but the interesting thing is I never got the feeling like uh I could write like that. I loved
Right.
stories, but it wasn't like, ooh, I can do that. And then it was McCarthy for me that
Uh-huh.
just flipped a switch and went, oh, wait, wow, okay. This is like this is different level shit.
Yeah,
you know?
it is
and
definitely different level.
and
Um,
and and it's got this bizarre combination of being poetic and incredibly spare at the same time. And
mhm.
I was like, I I, I could maybe do that, or try that. Whereas, like the Stephen King thing with horror, I've talked to other writers about this too. I don't feel like I can make something really scary. I feel like I can write a good crime scene. I feel like I can write a good Old West scene,
Right.
but making something terrifying seems really hard to me. And I don't know why.
I could never do it. I don't read a lot of horror. And I'll sit there and tell you I don't watch a lot of horror movies, but
Mhm.
yeah, all the great ones I've seen them for some reason.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, that is something that I would never even attempt to do.
Hmm.
And to be honest, you and I can sit here and we have talk about writers all day long and the ones that influence us. And I don't think I've ever said, oh, gee, I'm just going to write just like John McDonald, or I'm going to write just like Elmore Leonard. I never feel like I'm doing any of my influences any justice, but I know
Yeah,
that
for sure.
without them, I would still be out there floundering around.
Oh, without
Um,
question.
it's just it's kind of a we all have our egos, of course, but to say that, oh yeah, I just finished reading this Larry Brown novel, that's how I'm going to be from here
That,
on
yeah,
out.
exactly.
Never even come close, but
Right.
boy, I keep trying.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's totally true. That's funny. And I mean, and that's the thing, right? It must be a weird time. Neither of us have gotten to that level, nor, we may never, so that's okay. But when you get to a level where all of a sudden people are putting you in a category with people that you have read and always admired would be interesting,
Yeah,
because because in my mind I'm never going to get there. Like that would, so
right.
so even if people were to say it, it'd be like you know.
Right, and that's
Just-
that's to me that's kind of why they're influences. It's not
Mhm.
that it's not a comparison thing. It's just thank God they went out and kind of paved that road before I got to drive down it,
Right.
because it really gives you something to at least shoot for.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to
Sitting
aspire.
next to Joe Lansdale at a at a panel
You mentioned that. Yeah.
virtual.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just like, how in the hell did I end up here? And it's not that I'm the same quality, of course, but okay, I'm gonna sit there and listen to what he has to say because
Mhm.
Lansdale's one of those guys. He clearly knows how to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. We had him on the show. He's a great guy. Great guy. Fun.
Yeah,
And he's had that amazing career where he has done two things. He's managed to not only make a living for a very long time as a writer, which
yeah,
we all know is difficult enough, right? Uh, but he's also done it in multiple genres.
he has.
Yeah, and
And
he's done horror, he's
having
done
Leonard
some
on,
sci-fi, he's done crime. I mean, which is amazing. So
yeah,
I
yeah,
was
he is kind of a unique individual in that respect.
yeah yeah
At a conference, I got to listen to him. They kind of did a Nor at the bar during the conference
yeah
one night, and I wasn't expecting Joe to get up and read, but he
uh
did, and it's like, wow, this he can really do just about anything.
hmm yeah. No, it's fascinating. All right, so real quick, a couple quick hits here because we're gonna finish up.
Okay.
What is the in your mind, what is the best series that you've seen lately, TV series?
Ooh. Um, Probably Ozark.
Okay.
Um, I'm rewatching one now because the next season's about to come out. It's called The Tourist. It's on Netflix, and it is unlike anything I've seen in a long time. Um, it's new. It's Australian.
hmm
It has a Fargo feel to it, and
hmm
at the same time, it feels like you're watching Fargo with a memento lens on.
Right, right.
Um, and you can't stop watching it. It's just that good. But yeah, Ozark was an experience
I
without a doubt.
it's funny. I'm a huge I like Jason Bateman a lot.
Yeah.
Normally they're comedies, right?
Yeah.
And and he's hilarious. I have a funny little Jason Bateman story. It's not a story actually. It's just it's he doesn't know me, that's for sure. But I remember my mom took me to, funny enough, a show at the Roxy on the Sunset Strip when I was maybe 10. I'm gonna say 10.
Okay.
And Jason Bateman was in the cast at the Roxy as a little kid, and he was like around my age, maybe a couple years older or something like that. And I want to
Yeah.
say he sang like New York, New York or something like
Oh
that.
no.
Right on stage, and I remember seeing him back then, and all of a sudden, a few years later, he was on TV, and then obviously now he's Jason Bateman. But it's funny that you mentioned that. Yeah, those are.
Yeah.
What book? This can be a favorite of yours. It can be an old one. It can be a new one. Doesn't make a difference. What book out there do people have to read?
Oh boy, that's like asking me what my favorite movie is. What book do people
What
have to read?
What do they got to read?
Um,
What's something that you've read in the last, I don't know, 5, 10 years that just blew you away?
okay, this is we're fiction writers, we're crime fiction writers, but I'm going to go in a different direction.
Mhm.
There's a nonfiction book that I read a couple of years ago called Say Nothing.
Okay.
And you put me on the spot, and I cannot remember
Yeah.
the author's name, but the book
Okay.
is Say Nothing. It is about two sisters in Northern Ireland who were in the provisional IRA during the Troubles.
Ah.
Um, and God help us all if they ever make a movie out of it.
Yeah.
It is just so well researched
Hmm.
and well sourced and told as a story, not a book. It's not a
Right.
history book. It's not even trying to be a history book. Just a really, really compelling story about these two sisters. They grew up in Derry,
Hmm.
and they became radicalized.
Hmm.
That's the short version, and became pretty significant key players in the IRA during the 70s and 80s.
Excellent. Okay, good. Thanks, man. Well, Philip, we're gonna finish up here. So this has been Philip Thompson. He's got his new book out called Not Dead Enough. It is the third book in the Colt Harper series. He also has a story, by the way, called Rats in the Starlight Pulp Review #3, which we just put out in December. I think they came out around the same time, maybe a month or
They
yeah.
very close to each other. Yeah.
Yeah. So in the new review, Philip has a new story as well. So pick that up and pick the book up. We appreciate you staying with us this whole time. And Philip, have a great rest of your week. Hang out with me for a sec. We'll talk. And thanks so much, guys.
Thanks.
In this topsy turvy